Hello people, we are going to do a video today on speed painting techniques for beginners. For years now people have been saying to me, you've just got to share your marvelous painting techniques with the world. Well, actually I'm lying there. There's only one person that's been saying that, and that's me. This is not a set of techniques that is going to win you prizes in painting competitions. Um, what it is going to do is allow you to field a relatively large army within about a 24-hour period from start to finish painting. Now, this assumes you can apply an 8-hour day to your painting. Okay, so what I'm showing here, I'm just panning across, is an army I've just completed. These are Arabs and Tuaregs and Mughal cavalry and just kind of generic Muslims that can be used for pretty much anything in the Victorian period, and of course also for Victorian science fiction. They're great foes for the British at Khartoum or at Omdurman. They're fun to chase and beat chase the Foreign Legion across the desert with. And every figure you see here was 24 hours from now completely unpainted. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how I did what I did. Again, it's not going to give you a magnificent set of painted figures. What it's going to give you is something that you can game with and that you're not embarrassed to use on the battlefield. So turning the camera over here, what you're going to see, if I kind of set this up a little more, okay, are some of the things that I use. To get started, you're going to want to prime the figure. You're going to want to use some kind of a primer. Rust-Oleum or any kind of an automobile primer is great for metal figures. For plastic figures, if you want to do those, I would suggest metal figures at first because they're just not as tricky. Uh, Krylon Fusion for plastic is a great paint. It actually adheres to the plastic much better than ordinary enamel does. Just spray the figures down lightly. One light coat. If it doesn't completely cover the figure, spray it again and let it sit for about 24 hours. I guess I should have said that it's 24 hours from when you lay the brush to the figure. It does take an additional day to get started. Once you've got your figures primered, next thing you want to do is glue them to a 12-inch ruler. Okay, I've learned from hard experience, don't try to go with anything cheaper than this. You don't want to try and use balsa wood because parts of it will adhere to the figure, and you don't want to have pieces of wood stuck between your figure and the base. So all you do is you take this, you glue. You can see here where I've pulled the figures off. I only used a few on this one. You can ordinarily get about 20 or so 15 millimeter figures on one of these, or maybe 15 to a dozen 25 millimeter figures. Just stick them with a drop of white glue. Just one drop. You don't want them, tight on there forever. You want to be able to pop them off when you get done. And then you start your painting. Usually, you want to prime the figures in a color that is going to be covering most of the surface of the figure. Very often, this is going to be white or black. Both of those are very common primer colors. You just want to go ahead and paint the figure in that color. And here again, speed painting techniques. This is not for the master craftsman. And then just start filling in the details. I recommend acrylic paints. They're not really anything magical. There are enamels out there that do a fine job, but acrylic paints are water washable. You don't want to wash them with water. You want to wash them with isopropyl alcohol, at least 70%. Make sure that it is not rubbing alcohol, because rubbing alcohol contains some oil, and you want no oil in this. But if you want to thin them, if you want to clean them up, if you want to make washes out of them, and a wash is just a very thin layer of paint that will sort of fall into the folds of the figure, and that's kind of a more advanced technique. But you want to do all that with alcohol. Clean your brushes with alcohol. Probably you're going to want to dry brush at some point. You're going to want to use some kind of cheap kids brushes to do that. I think these brushes by Crayola, the crayon people, are really good for that. They're very cheap. You're also going to want a set of somewhat better quality brushes. You're not going to want to use what comes right out of the tester's jar, but you're going to want some camel hair brushes or something like that. This is one that's been through a few miniatures here, as has this one. You want to paint in some of the details. You want to get in a good 6 to 8 colors on a figure. Makes for a nice start on this. Once you have the figure completely painted, you want to go ahead and do a little dry brushing. Now, dry brushing, I'm going to show one of these Tuaregs here because they're really the only ones that I've done any dry brushing on in this set. And this fella here, he's got a red beard just because I wanted to be a little different. But you can sort of see how he was painted in black. Then I took one of these kids brushes that I was telling you about, and I just dipped it in a little purple paint, and you sort of then take it and you run it over over a piece of paper until it's almost coming off dry. Then you kind of brush it hard over the figure, and you'll find that the lighter color will show up on all the folds, etc., of the piece, and it just gives a more realistic effect. You get a shadowy effect that way, where especially if you're doing it over black. You always want to dry brush over black or over a darker shade of the same color. And I apologize for the quality of the video, but I still haven't learned how to do that. For the speed painting technique, you only want to dry brush one color. You only want to dry brush the color that shows up over most of the figure. And here on this figure, I've just dry brushed purple over the black. His flesh is brown. His sword there is silvery, with a little black washed over that to give it more of a kind of a rough and ready steely effect. And I gave him a red beard just because I felt like, as I said, being contrary. That done, you then want to go ahead and let the figure dry completely, and also let it dry between coats of paint. You're going to have a temptation sometimes to paint too much too quickly, but don't do that. Let the paint dry completely. Okay, I do not flock my bases. Flocking is when you glue. If you look at this cavalryman right here, that is what's called an unflocked base. Flocking is where you glue sand or maybe a little bit of some kind of railroad grit, or a model railroading grit, over the base of the figure to give it more of a look of sand or grass or something like that. Make it look a little bit more realistic. I don't do that. I think that it looks nice initially, but it develops a very shabby look very quickly because it's impossible to keep dust out of it, and especially if you're in a position where you have to keep your figures in a rather dusty area like a closet or a workshop, and many of us do. You just don't have the ability to clean it. Once it's done, and the only thing you can do is strip the flock off. So anyway, I paint the bases black. Then I use floor tile, this stuff right here, as mounting material. Now my figures are 15 millimeter scale, so one of these pieces of floor tile works very well to mount a cavalry figure. There are smaller scale floor tile pieces that you can use to mount infantry on, and if you're using 25 millimeter, if that's your scale, or 28 millimeter, as is common with GW and some of the more modern companies, then it's very common to use a 25 millimeter scale tile base, if that's what if you want to do. If the figure that you have already comes with a base, just use that. That's fine. Once the figure, epoxy the figure to the base. This stuff here is a two-part epoxy. It sets in 5 minutes. I don't care where you are in the world, you can get a two-part epoxy someplace. It's much more workable than super glue is. It fills gaps as super glue does not. And I see that we're getting to the end of our time on this video, so I'm going to go ahead and stop now and do a part 2.